Please feel free to tweet throughout the webinar and afterwards using the hashtag #SlideDesign, all lowercase. There will be a link provided at the end to an evaluation survey. We welcome you all, and it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sidneyeve Matrix. Sidneyeve is a Queen's University National Scholar and Associate Professor of Media and Film, and joins us today to talk about the creation of effective presentations, posters, and social media postings for knowledge translation. Thank you, Sidneyeve. Please go ahead.
Wonderful. Hello there, everyone. Thanks so much for coming. If you feel like typing in the chat where you are today, connecting with us, we would love to see the spectrum. We see lots of people are just joining us. Welcome. And let's see here. We have about 20-minute presentations for you, so there should be lots of time for questions. Hi, Meredith. Hi, Anna. And Nina's in Ottawa. Wonderful. So what we will be talking about first is high engagement visual research stories by design. And what do I mean by that? Basically, I'm going to cover 3 tips. I'd like to sort of walk the talk and be brief with my first tip. Then I'll focus on being consistent, which will be the second tip. And then I'll talk about publishing, which is all about how it's so important for us to share our work. So thanks very much for entering your location in the chat. It's lovely to see people connecting from all over the place. Welcome. I hope you get lots of actionable insights out of this webinar. So please let me know if you can hear me or if I need to be speaking a little bit louder in the chat. We are keeping one eye on that as we're going along. And I'll also be sharing some links in the chat so that you can have a list of all the resources that I'll be talking about, and then we will email those to you after so that you don't have to worry, thanks Meredith, about writing everything down as we go. You can just sort of sit back, relax, and take it in. So I'm going to start with brevity. You probably have a ton of information that you want to dump on your audience in your presentation, but the advice here from Gabrielle Reed is that we take one step away from the shovel. You know, easier said than done. Certainly content density can be a problem in our presentations because if you're like me, you think all this information is so very important, but it is very easy for us to give the audience just way too much information to digest. And I'm going to quote Dilbert creator Scott Adams here for a minute because he's a master of short storyboards. And he says, when people have an idea they want to express, they want to give you every little bit of it, even when they know that less is more. It's just too hard for them to leave out that extra slide. And so one way that we could do that and sort of, put all our ideas on paper and then make really careful choices about what we present is to start with a mind map. Mind mapping is, of course, a great way to capture all of our thoughts. We can do some visual planning. We can do some brainstorming. And basically, it's just about getting organized. And once we have everything organized, it may be much easier for us to simplify our message. And if we're doing that and we're looking for an online tool to use to do that, we may want to look at Coggle. And I'm going to just see if this will go in the chat very nicely for me. Hey, alrighty. And so that would be a tool that is owned by Google. Therefore, it's pretty accessible. You do have to have a Google sign-in, and you can use it in a collaborative way. You can store it in the cloud. It's just an easy way for us to create and share mind maps. I'd be very curious to see if other people are using Coggle for your research, for presentations, for teaching purposes. Is anybody else in here? I'm using it as part of my assignments. Students, getting them to do a little bit of mind mapping and brainstorming before they go ahead and hit the slide decks, etc., so that they don't get overly ambitious. I guess another way for us to get organized and to be brief is to think about sketching out our story structure. And maybe we could use a 3-act model. So maybe 3 key points such as, for example, past, present, future, or a presentation that's structured about, a problem, solution, and benefit. Or we could even do the, what, so what, and now what, which is a classic, 3-part structure for presentations. As they say at Harvard Business Review, when we're planning out our presentations, we want to parachute in rather than have this preamble. So we may want to start with a brief story, maybe a case study, a personal anecdote, something that we have rehearsed so that it's nice and short. Maybe we want to open with a startling statistic to grab the audience's attention. And then, of course, at point C, we want to close strong. So instead of just saying, well, that's it, or having no conclusion at all and just kind of standing up there awkwardly, we want to choose our final words very carefully. Classically speaking, this is a chance for us to have a bit of a recap and hammer home our message, or what we hope is our point. But we can also use that point C to have a bit of a call to action, or even leave the audience with a last interesting tip. So generally speaking, if we are trying to be brief, it makes much more sense to just put one point on each slide. Sometimes, if you're like me, your slides are doubling as a bit of a teleprompter, and so we have to try to get away from putting too much text on the slide. Maybe we could just use one phrase or headline per slide maximum. And just using slides with minimal text, it will lower the cognitive load, or the ask that we're making of our audience. And then maybe if they have not so many words to read, they'll be able to remember our message and to listen to our message. And of course, when we're doing a presentation, a scientific presentation, or a philosophical one, we want to make sure our ideas are understood. One way to do this is to evaluate your slide using what they call the glance test. So just kind of glancing at the slide, do you feel that the person in the audience will be able to basically understand what you're talking about without you standing there and explaining it? If so, you may be ready to put your slides on the web later, because they may stand on their own. Sometimes we see slides like this where we know that the person is not necessarily thinking about their audience. They haven't necessarily invested a lot of time in their presentation, because they are including a lot of statistics and graphs and charts that we can't really read. So I guess the takeaway here would be, to step away from the shovel and only include the data and the diagrams that we have time to explain. And then we want to reproduce all those key points and in simple charts and graphs, so that the audience knows what we think is the most important information for them to take away. We've highlighted our main points. Now, usability researchers have published a study in the journal Computers and Human Behavior, and they've showed the importance of white space. They say it improves audience comprehension by up to 20% in terms of information design. So that's a good takeaway, because the simplicity in our presentation style may help the audience focus and capture their attention, and they will understand our message just that much quicker and that much longer. How can we do that? One way would be to experiment by using a tool, a cloud-based tool called Haiku Deck. And I'm just going to copy, and I'm going to paste. And Haiku Deck is a template application that lives in the clouds. It will help us to create a consistent look and feel through our whole presentation deck. Basically, it will allow us to use one body of typography, colors, and imagery across all of our slides. And it will help us to just have a very emotional impact, because the slides will look something like this. They'll be very minimalistic, and as you may see in the slides, the example here, the Haiku Deck logo is appearing in one corner, but the photo attribution is appearing in the other corner. That's really handy for presenters and students alike, because it means that we're going to be using Creative Commons images, and it will help us to add the proper photo attribution so that we won't worry about stepping on copyright toes. So what's the message here when we use a kind of template like Haiku Deck provides us, free in the cloud? Fewer words, more visuals. When we're using text, less is almost always more on a slide. And it will provide us with a whole range of choices in terms of layout and image filters. Is anybody in here already using Haiku Deck? I bet you are. It's been around for a while. If you are, please do let us know in the chat. It's my understanding that this is a free application, and I'm assuming they also have a professional membership that we can purchase. If anybody's purchased that, and there's a differential feature between the two memberships, I'd love to know in the chat if you have a second. So, at any rate, Annalise, I don't think it only works on a Mac. In fact, I think it only works on an Apple tablet, but because it's a cloud-based application, it should work on Mac and PC. But please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong about that. Now, what are we trying to do with Brevity here? We're trying to get our big ideas into bite-sized pieces. So another way to say that is to have our presentations contain tasty research morsels. If we do that, if we break our big ideas into bite-sized, info snacks, or however you want to say it, then they would be also ready for social media publications. So I'm going to deviate away from presentations for a second, as I promised in the advertisement for this presentation, and mention social media publications for our research as well. So if we're doing a research presentation, we might also want to be thinking about a cross-channel, cross-platform strategy. We can see some examples here where researchers have pulled an interesting statistic or point and they are using it on Twitter. Of course, this would also work on Pinterest. I would also work on Instagram and the like, and Facebook. This may be a picture, it may be a pull quote, it may be a link to a longer piece, long-form journalism. But at any rate, it's one way for us to get more people to engage with our research. To make these kinds of photo quotes or quotable bits, you may be interested in using a tool like Canva. And I'm just going to drop that into the chat there. And Canva is a tool that will allow us to have a kind of easy graphic design function when we don't have graphic design backgrounds, because it comes with pre-sized social media image and header templates. And we can use them for our marketing materials and our documents and our presentations and our invitations, anything you can imagine. They've already got a template for it. Anybody in here already using Canva? I've heard of a lot of social media marketers who have been using it, and students as well. You can use free or paid photos or upload your own photos when you're using Canva. The whole idea is that it's got a bit of a drag and drop functionality to it, so it just makes it so easy. What's also notable, and maybe you can see from my slide, that a lot of the clip art, etc., is free, but because it's a freemium app, you can pay for premium twiddly bits, let's say, and then you can search for more images, and maybe some of them will cost you $1. So when you go to check out or download your finished composition, it will tell you that you need to pay for those $1 design elements that you opted to pay. And Veronica is stating here that if you pay the membership fee, you can translate your decks to PowerPoint. Thanks for that, Veronica. That's really useful. And Canva's already being used at NeuroDevNet headquarters. Thanks, Bethany. That's a good insight. I appreciate that. So let's see. In terms of our 3 points, I'm going to jump to point 2, and that's all about consistency. So when I'm just pulling an example here from Pampers, because they make it look so easy. They have these wonderful pictures of babies, but what they've done is they've created a design template which will make their photos all look instantly more consistent and more professional. So that's a takeaway from a brand that we may be able to use for our research as well, if you have the time to design some kind of a frame for your social media postings. Now, one quick way to be more consistent in our presentation design and other graphic design is to use a grid to keep our content organized. Using a grid is really useful when we want to have a kind of quick way to design things, especially if we're working collaboratively, because when we place things on a grid, it just makes so much more sense to other designers who jump on the project. But also, we know that from an information design perspective, it's going to help people to navigate a website or understand your slides if they have a kind of consistency and harmony to them. So working on a grid might be worth your while if you just want to give your presentation that extra organized, calm, harmonious edge. We also may want to look at using very interesting and consistent color schemes all the way through. I'm going to dump the link to Design Seeds into the chat there. We know color is a very powerful visual communication tool, and usability researchers say when it's used properly, it can improve comprehension by up to 75%. So we know that colors have certain associations that come with them, and we want to be thinking about our audience and what colors may be most appropriate or most provocative, whatever our design goal is. But whether or not we choose a warm or a monochromatic or a cool scheme is probably less important than the fact that we do not choose a bunch of random colors. So I guess the rule here might be you're usually safe if you aim to use only 3 or 4 color choices throughout your whole deck. I'm also going to mention in terms of consistency that typography matters, and I'd like to share a couple of different sources that I use to find fonts. One of them, Font Squirrel, is free, and My Fonts is a paid site where I purchase a lot of professional fonts. Typography plays a really important role in presentation design because when it's used correctly all the way through our slide deck, it communicates a kind of tone to our message, but it also lends a layer of professionalism. So just for the purposes of being specific here, a serif font is one that has the extra little tails on the end of each letter, right? It has the little feet. But research shows that serif fonts are actually harder to read when they are projected. We want to use sans serif fonts, like the one at the top of this slide in the word typography, because it doesn't have those little feet. And I also want to share with you that although many people will say that your headline should only be, 40 to 60, maybe 50 point font, the headline at the top of this slide is actually 125 points. So I want to just share that just for comparison's sake, in case you're thinking, well, I'd like to make my headline similar to the one I see on this particular slide. You're going to be going over 125 points or up to that. The next piece in terms of consistency would be to do the work to grab a set of icons, pictographs, that can add visual variety to our presentation, but we're going to use them through every slide. It will make the slides more appealing. It will aid in terms of information comprehension, navigation. But you want to pick a certain kind of a set of fun flourishes like the ones that you'll find for free at Flat Icon, and I'm just pasting that link in there for you, and then use them on all of your slides. Now, using a template might seem to be a bit of a creative cop-out, but from a creative perspective, templates can just give us that added edge of professionalism to our work, whether you're designing infographics or whether you're designing presentations. You may want to look up what templates are available. Piktochart is a free application, and it also has a professional membership available with an educational discount. It will also allow you to drag and drop and point and click and use over 400 professionally designed templates, and they have over 4,000 of those pictograms that we were looking at before, icons and images that you can use. You can also import from your Microsoft Excel spreadsheet right to Piktochart, so it's definitely worth a look. You can download free high resolution, high definition, I should say, JPEGs, PNGs, or PDFs from the site. Are we using Piktochart? Anybody in the room already using this? My students have been using this in lieu of creating some research essays, and they're enjoying it very much. I'm going to move on and share with you another find. A good site for me has been Creative Market. As you can see here, if I was in a bit of a rush and I wanted to have a beautiful PowerPoint presentation, I could purchase this template, but from a professional designer for $15. Creative Market is a great place for us to find designs. I'm going to just copy and paste that link, and that didn't work. And I'll try it again. Of course, these are paid templates, but you're also of course supporting individual artists, and so that's always a good idea. You can buy digital design projects for commercial use or for personal use. I'd like to also share with you a darker scheme if you prefer to have something that's a bit more muted. Again, $15 for this particular design. Another site where I could go and buy some templates, I'll bring it up in a few minutes, but that one's probably my favorite. My last point here, and I've only got 3 minutes to cover this for my 20-minute presentation, is just to encourage you to think about publishing your slides. SlideShare, owned by LinkedIn, a very popular platform for us to share our slides, a global audience for your work that you might find that very compelling as well. Place to put your slides in the cloud and get lots of traffic, and you may feel that it's very important for you to disseminate your work in that way. I just want to note that it's important that you PDF your slides before you put them up. Somebody here at Carnegie Mellon forgot to do that, and their deck became almost immediately unreadable, which is really unfortunate and kind of awkward and embarrassing, wouldn't you say? So I'm going to move on and share with you Figshare. Figshare is a startup. It was then purchased by, I think it's Macmillan Publishers, now owns it, or is their parent company. What's excellent about Figshare, I almost called it Pigshare, Figshare, is that this is a repository where we can make all kinds of research outputs available in a citable manner. In other words, all items get a DOI, a digital object identifier, which is a unique code that helps us to cite them, and they're all released under a Creative Commons license. And on Figshare you can put up your presentations, but also your data sets, your figures, your videos, your posters, your infographics. Is anybody here using Figshare? It's relatively new. It was down for a while and then relaunched, and now it's getting lots of great media attention. Of course, we shouldn't forget about Flickr, just because it's owned by Yahoo, and we don't know how much longer Yahoo is going to be around. But at any rate, Figshare, if you go there, you'll see lots of scientific posters have found a home, and people are able to add comments, of course, and ask for feedback. So it's a very useful site for presenters. Your posters will display beautifully in high resolution on Flickr, and they'll be instantly ready to share. If you are designing a presentation, you may want to make sure that you don't have too many words on the slide, and then as a result, you've got a few more extra things to say. To that end, you may want to design a one-sheet takeaway or a handout that you leave behind. To do so, you may want to go to a site called Graphic River, which would allow you to create a beautiful brochure, buy a beautiful brochure and create it in InDesign or Illustrator or Photoshop or Word, any of these kinds of programs that we have on our computers already, and it would be a beautiful brochure for us to leave behind, and then we wouldn't feel so anxious about not putting too many words on our slide. These examples from Graphic River, this one shows 3 pieces of a research project. So again, it's about moralizing our very large ideas. The last slide that I would like to share, the last slide tool I should say, is this one from Duarte Designers. I think Bob is also going to mention Duarte. They've been a great resource for me personally. I'll share the link in the chat. Slide Docs is a very handy idea because it's about creating sort of an executive summary, an overview of your key points. I'll share another image of a slide doc. It's about using PowerPoint to create text-heavy documents, and then you would be able to share those with the people perhaps after or before your presentation. These are obviously graphics-heavy, diagram-heavy types of layouts, and if we go to the Slide Doc site, we can download these PowerPoint templates for free. I am out of time. I'd like to say thanks very much for your attention, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Annalise and then to Bob.
Thank you very much, Sidneyeve. That was incredible, and you gave us some incredibly practical information. I would now like to introduce our second speaker for the webinar, Dr. Bob Connolly. Bob is a neonatologist and active medical educator, and he'll focus on slide design and effective use of PowerPoint. Thank you, Bob. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's a real privilege to be here this afternoon. The work of the investigators of NeuroDevNet is certainly something that's near and dear to my heart. As many of you know, as a neonatologist, I am very familiar with neurodevelopmental sequelae that can be related to premature birth. So I applaud all of you for the work that you're doing to advance knowledge in children's brain development. I know that your work is bringing us a lot of important information that you will want to share with many audiences. And so I also applaud you that you're here today because of your interest in presentations. Because I'm sure that you're like me when you go to a lot of your scientific meetings or other presentations, you feel sometimes like this. And it's unfortunate that we have so many important things to say, but why is it that these presentations sort of generate this reaction out of us? And it isn't just in scientific presentations. I was recently at, and I want to say this, a medical education conference, and these are world-renowned experts in education. And at the plenary, they had 4 speakers who had very important things to say, great messages, and some great work that they wanted to get across. And I kid you not, 3 out of the 4 of them apologized for their PowerPoint slides. Things like, I know this is a busy slide. My favorite was, I know you can't read this. And you just stop and say, well, if you know I can't read it, why are you doing that? And I was intrigued to find an article in Frontiers of Psychology in 2012, a paper written by Coslin, who looked at a lot of the psychological principles and analyzed PowerPoint presentations across a number of sectors, business, academia, and science, and found that we violate the 8 cognitive communication principles almost universally when we do PowerPoint. And their conclusion, I think, is an important one. They said that the psychological foundations for effective slideshow presentation design are neither obvious nor necessarily intuitive. And so when I was at another medical education conference, this presenter, I think, summed it up nicely by saying, if content is king, then design is queen. We're so focused on our content that sometimes we forget about design. And so what I want to leave you today with the thought of is that if we're going to become effective presenters, we really need to start to think like designers. So when I say the word design, and particularly maybe around a group of scientists, your first thought of design might be thinking of, swatches of materials and looking about where you place your furniture in the room. But I don't mean it in that way. Simply stated, design I'm thinking about is a way of how do we communicate things in a visual way, whether that's with text, with images, or with both. A professor from the California Institute of Arts spoke of it this way. He says that a designer is a maker of meaning, a maker of form, or ideally, a maker of both. And this making of meaning and in form is what I like to think of as presentation design. Now, what I'm going to focus on primarily is about slide design, or the media that you're going to use in your presentation. So to do that, I really have three objectives. So please forgive me for being a clinician, but I always have to make a diagnosis. So I want you to be able to approach a slide and be able to make a diagnosis of that slide, and then be able to apply three very simple design tips. And I'm going to emphasize on simple because neonatologists are simple doctors, and so if I can do it, I want to assure you that all of you can. And then finally, we want to test, be able to say, can we actually, or have we actually achieved good design in our slides? But before I do that, whenever I talk about slider media design, I always get concerned that people are just going to jump to making their slides pretty. And really, effective presentation is so much more than that. So I want to just spend a few minutes just thinking about meaning, or reminding you about meaning. And this is really about the content. What is it, that message that you have to say? But what I think is missing in a number of presentations is not just the what that you have to say, but it's the so what. Why does this matter? Why should we listen to this? Why is this such a good idea? And so I want to just illustrate with an example of one of the NeuroDevNet investigators that I was able to come across when I was actually looking at your website. And this was a study done by Emily Bell, who I believe was on the call but was having trouble with the speakers. So at least she's not here to correct me if I've misinterpreted her research. But Emily from the Neuroethics Research Unit in Montreal did a great study. It published in February of 2015, and it was looking at magnetic resonance imaging, or MRI, and the prognosis of infants who have had a severe asphyxia at birth. So this clearly caught my interest as a neonatologist. This is something we deal with on a regular basis. And her findings were certainly interesting to me. The first finding was that neonatologists don't trust the interpretations of MRI for prognosis when they're given by radiologists or pediatric neurologists. So anybody who knows neonatologists may not find that very surprising, because we do tend to be a skeptical lot. But what was even more interesting to me was the finding that the certainty that clinicians had was correlated with the severity of what their perceived severity of the injury is. And the big thing, though, that you would miss if you didn't think about the so what is, so what, why does that matter? But if you think about, if we're very certain about a bad prognosis, even though we may be incorrect, we could make some significant poor choices, particularly when it comes around to end-of-life care, if we're concerned about neurologic outcome. So I think that no matter how pretty you make your slides, if you really don't have that so what message across, you've really not been very effective in your presentation. Now, let's talk about making our form a little bit better. So the first thing I'm going to need you to do is I need to rid you of two very prevalent misconceptions. And the first one is that PowerPoint is not Microsoft Word. And whenever I say this to people, they look at me like I'm crazy, because of course nobody ever makes that mistake. But if I was to ask you, how many of you have actually distributed printed documents made up of PowerPoint slides, or have actually received those, then what you're witnessing is that people have actually used a slide generation software to actually make a printed document. And when they print that out, I don't know about you, but I don't particularly like to read in little square boxes with fonts that have been, with type sizes that have been reduced so hard that it's hard to read. I really feel that if it's meant to be printed, it actually should be made as a document using the appropriate software. So they are not the same thing, and using one for both purposes really fails at doing well at either of them. And then the second misconception to get rid of is that the templates that ship with these programs are not good examples of design. And I think I was certainly susceptible to thinking that when I first started with PowerPoint, but clearly the designers at Microsoft know more about this than I do. But in fact, if what we want to achieve is clearer messages to our audience, you'll be best to actually leave these behind. So Sidneyeve already made reference to Nancy Duarte, and what I want to say is that you would probably smart not to take your design advice from a neonatologist. So I pulled in some experts to help me with this. And Nancy Duarte has written a fantastic book called Slideology, and this is where we can make our diagnosis on our slides. So if you think of some slides that you may have seen or have presented recently, would you say it classified as a document, where really this is a very text-heavy slide with a lot of words on it, and it's what we call in the design world a slideument, something that really should be printed but has been projected on the screen? Or was it more of a teleprompter slide? And I think that you would identify that these are fairly prevalent in presentations. There's fewer words, usually in bullet points, and they really seem to act as a way for reminding the presenter what to say. Or finally, was it actually a presentation slide where this was just a clear visual that was really reinforcing and illustrating what the speaker was saying? And I think that this is what we should strive for, because we all know that when we're up presenting, our audience really only has one of two choices. They're going to listen to you speak, or they're going to read what's on the slide. And if we're there presenting, we really want them focusing on what it is we have to say. So how do we achieve this? Well, I want to actually just get Nancy herself to give us a little of insight of how we can do this.
So as a presenter, you obviously are the focal point. You are the one with the big idea, and you want your big idea to come across. So you do not want your idea obscured by crazy visuals and overwhelming verbal dialogue at the same time. You want to minimize the visual stream and optimize the verbal stream. And to do that, that means you're going to have to kind of separate yourself from how much junk you put on the slide. So what you want to do is keep every slide to have one message. And you also want to minimize the content on the slide. So as a presenter, you start to use the slides as a crutch. If you haven't rehearsed enough, you're going to want words and pictures up there as a mnemonic device so you remember what you're trying to say. But if you are really rehearsed and it's a really high stakes presentation, you should be able to remove everything from the slide that isn't about the audience. Remove your crutches, remove those little words, and remove all the little pictures you put there to try to remember what to say. Strip all that off and only leave on the slide the one image, the one imprint that you want to make on the audience's mind. So make it about the audience and not so much about you.
So that last statement I found to be the most profound, and I really remind myself of that when I'm coming to designing my presentations. Make it about the audience and not so much about you. So that can be kind of scary if you're used to your teleprompter slides. How am I going to remember what to say? How am I going to know what I was supposed to say for each slide? So for example, if you put this slide up, so you've designed this and it's great, and you go, well, what is it that I was going to say? I completely forget, particularly with the nerves. And what you can do is that all of you may have noticed that there's this box at the bottom of your slides often where you can put notes in. So I know lots of people often put notes in there so that when they're printed out as handouts, there's some additional material there. But what you might not be aware of is that those notes can be used in what's called presenter view. So you can set up your computer that what you see on your screen is different than what is projected onto the screen. And so what you see here is this is a typical presenter view where you'll see the slide that you're presenting at the moment, you'll see what your next slide is, but in fact you can also see your notes below. So if you just need a little prompt of what you're going to say next, it's there for you. Now, I want to introduce you to another expert, because now that we're going to say strip everything off the slides and start with a blank canvas, how are we going to start putting things on there in a way that's going to be effective? Gar Reynolds is one of the leaders in presentation design that I wanted to just share some tips that I've learned from him. And these came from what I would say is probably the most influential book in my approach to presentations, which is called Presentation Zen. And I'm going to take 3 basic design tips from this. And if you just want to invest in one book and one book alone, this is the one that I would recommend. So the first tip from this is, and I believe Sidneyeve mentioned this, is to embrace empty space. Don't be scared of all the white space that might be there on your slide, and resist the temptation for you to fill it in. And this could be something as simple as nice big text, as again Sidneyeve says, 120 points or more are quite common in the slides that I do. And then you can use a simple image in the corner if you need to. This doesn't need to be white space. Empty space could actually be part of an image. So as you can see here, this was actually a presentation I did while I was doing my MBA. We had to do a sort of Dragon's Den pitch to a bunch of angel investors. And so I used this image that had a lot of empty space but with the theme of runners, so you got the sense of competition. So before you start taking your images and blowing them up, I would ask or suggest that you be very careful that they're of high quality resolution, because you don't want them to look pixelated like this. And so you need to pay some attention that the images are actually large enough that they can bleed across an entire slide. The other thing I would highly recommend is that as you go searching for images, if you're not going to pay for them, then don't put the watermarked version on, because nothing screams cheapskate more than this. It's a big pet peeve of mine. Now the second tip that I would give is that using that big empty space or setting up that empty space, similar to what Sidneyeve said, is to use a simple grid. And here you can see that we've set this up just like a tic-tac-toe board. So instead of me trying to explain how you can use this grid, I'm going to have Gar explain that for you.
One thing that I think is really effective is this idea of rule of thirds, which originally sort of came from the golden mean. But the rule of thirds is used by many designers, especially photographers, when they're trying to compose an image. So let's look at some examples here in our world of slide design. So when you look at this slide, you'll notice that I actually put down a grid following the rule of thirds, so it's broken up into thirds. You'll notice that a strong visual element, the person running there, takes up the right third. And even the ground and the mountains take up the bottom third, and then the text element is over there in the upper left third. So it's not by accident, and there's large empty space there that is a really sort of natural space for the text, and it also naturally leads the eye from the right to the left. Here are some more examples of slides that use the rule of thirds to utilize effectively empty space.
And then the final tip that I'd like to leave you with is to take you to design school, and let's consider the big four. And this is what I like to say is this is where we're actually going to make our slides look like crap. So first we want to look at the element of contrast. So contrast is quite simple. It's really about the difference in size, making things big or making things small, or changing colors such as red, or here you can see the great contrast of black on white that really makes that very easy to see and process. So again, this was the same presentation in my pitch to the Dragon's Den. We were actually pitching, I hate to admit it, we were pitching medical tourism, and so we wanted to get the idea of the high prevalence of the need for joint replacements in men over 65. So you can see that the nice sort of image, the big black and white image of the X-ray really stands out, and then I really wanted to aim that this was a huge increase in the need for this. Repetition is the second element, and I must admit that repetition for me has been the most difficult one to implement very well. But let me tell you what repetition certainly is not. That is to not put your logo on every slide. So, you know, I just love watching presentations where people have the Queen's logo on every one. It's as if the audience is going to forget that that's where you're from, and they need that. Whereas it's actually taking up space and really just being noise instead of signal. But I did recently find a great, what I think is a great application of repetition. And this is a colleague of mine who's a pediatric surgeon in the UK. And so he does a presentation and he divides it into 3 sections that he calls P1, P2, and P3. And as you can see, he starts P1 with an image of a little girl. He has some slides in between, and then sort of concludes his section of P2 with that same image, but different text on the end. And then does the same thing for P2, and again for P3. And then ends his presentation with each one of those slides making a summary. So I thought this was an incredibly simple yet very effective demonstration of how you can use repetition. The A of crap is alignment, and this really, again, simple concept that things should look deliberately placed. So when I was designing the slides for this presentation, you can see I dropped some guidelines on there because I wanted to be precise that the text was exactly spaced out the way that I wanted it to be. This makes your slides look professional and doesn't look sloppy, and makes them look well designed. Because if you don't pay attention to alignment, there certainly will be people in the audience who will notice and potentially have a negative reaction. And then finally, proximity. Proximity is simply keeping things together that are meant to be together and moving things that are not related away. So this is a simple example I use. So this would be a very typical sort of introductory slide of a talk you might give. So this was a talk I gave a few years ago. You see I have my heading, my who I am, where I'm from, and my logo. And applying proximity simply says arrange it like this, where I move the title away from my contact or my personal information, and moving it up towards the left side is sort of draws your eye there first, so you get the title, which is the most important part, knowing what this is about, and then moving my contact information away, making it quicker and easier to process. So I often get pushback, certainly from my education colleagues, well, how do you teach anything complicated if you're going to make all these slides with so little on it? So I want to give you a real-life example of one, and this is actually from a session that I teach in first-year medicine. I'm teaching them about neonatology, and what the key message that I want them to know is that why is it so important that we get babies established in ventilation shortly after birth, and why is this such a critical moment in their transition? And really it's about what happens if it, like what are the consequences if that doesn't happen. So this would be a typical slide that you would probably see most lecturers use. And when I present this live, so this is something I can't do in a webinar, but when I present this live, there's an interesting transformation over the audience. Suddenly, well over 90% of the people are no longer looking at me. They're reading this slide. You might even sense some frustration because what I'm saying isn't the same thing that's on the slide. They're really not quite sure where I am. So how can we do this better? Well, this is the solution that I came up with. I'm not saying it's the best solution, but this is how I present this now. And I start with just a simple flow diagram. If we start with the failure to establish ventilation, which leads to decreased perfusion in the pulmonary arteries, and this causes the baby to become hypoxemic, hypercapnic, and metabolic acidosis, which further increases their pulmonary vascular resistance, which then further decreases pulmonary perfusion. So in a very simple way, I just diagrammatically did this and did it in a stepwise manner so that they could follow. But what I think is also more important, it's conveying the so what. So this all sounds terribly important to start with, but the so what is that this is a positive feedback loop, that if we don't intervene quickly, the baby continues to go around in this circular downward spiral and end up with a condition that has a high mortality rate, and we call this persistent pulmonary hypertension of the newborn. So I think that in the end, what I find helpful is to think of your slides like a billboard. If you step back and think about what a billboard is to do, you're cruising along down the highway. So here in Ontario, it's the 401 where we're zooming along, supposed to be at 100 kilometers per hour, but most of us a bit more than that. But a billboard is to say we want to be able to look at that, get the message, and get our eyes back on the road so we don't have an accident. So if you think about your presentation slides in the same way, that's exactly what you want to achieve. They can look at it, process it quickly, and then their attention is back on you, listening to what you have to say and the message that you want them to hear. And I know that Sidneyeve already referenced this, but there is actually a formal glance test with a number of items. So for us people who are big on evaluation, there's actually a checklist you can do of various elements, and it's really helping you tease out what is signal versus what might be noise on your slides. And I do have a takeaway for you, and I have a reference for that there. So in the end, I want to remind you that when we think about effective presenters, we want to think like designers, where we are a maker of both meaning and a maker of form. So I hope now that you can apply a diagnosis to your slides or the slides of others. Use 3 design tips. That would be to embrace empty space, to use a grid, and to make your slides look like crap. And then finally, using the glance test, you can test whether you have achieved those objectives. I want you to remember that PowerPoint is not Microsoft Word, and so we should present slides and distribute documents. Discard those PowerPoint templates, but replace them with a blank slide with a grid, and to make your slides look like crap. So as promised, I have actually have a handout, and I'll just put the link in there as well, that really goes through a lot of what I've talked to today and a lot of other things about how you might prepare and some tips on delivery. I welcome you to use that and distribute it as needed or as you wish, and I will also update that as my knowledge advances. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to the question period.
Thank you to our speaker, Dr. Bob Connolly, for that excellent presentation. And now I'd like to turn it over to Stacy Ross to facilitate the question and answer period.
Okay, anybody with any question, please type it into the chat box. There was one posted earlier that I don't think Sidneyeve would have addressed, and it was from Tracy. What format is the presentation in using Haiku Deck? Would it be compatible for digital signage on a smart TV, for instance?
Hi, this is Sidneyeve. I'm not sure what you mean by format, but yeah, I think it would look wonderful on a smart TV because it's sitting in the cloud, right? So it should be optimized for whatever whatever screen you're using. Having said that, I think that the larger your TV is, oftentimes with these cloud designs, the more pixelated they get, and it seems like there's almost nothing that we can do about that. So when students are signing in to our webinars on their 60-inch televisions, they do get a little bit fuzzy.
Okay, and I see that Meredith Curie has posted a question on background color. Is there research on what is best? I noticed both of you used white.
Bob, you want to take that?
Sure. So I'll first say I'm not familiar with the research on that. I defer to white a fair bit, really under the principle of contrast. So there are, I mentioned the 8 cognitive psychological principles. And it's very interesting if you were to sort of line those up and some of the principles that, or the operation of those principles that they did in the article, they really did talk about contrast. So nothing better than white to make contrast. I'm not saying white's the only one to do, but it's usually the safest. Color is not my forte for sure. Just ask my wife. She sometimes has to dress me, you know, because I don't do that terribly well. But so I stick with white. Occasionally I will go sort of black on white, but I just do it as a safe thing.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that, Bob. Great tips. Meredith has just posted another question. One concern I have with reduced text is that some people are auditory learners and some are visual. So if you remove the visual content, how is that learner supported?
Okay, I'll take a stab at that. That's a great question, Meredith. This is Sidneyeve. So I don't think that either one of us suggested that we remove the visual content, but I think your point is likely that we've removed some of the text from the slides. And I think that's so that if that's your question, if it's not, then please correct me. It is. And so I guess my response to that would be to say that we are not removing the sort of soundtrack from the slides, right? So the presenter would be there doing the voiceover. And of course we could also do voice over slides if we're recording to put it up on SlideShare or other cloud-based platforms. And so I'm not sure that everybody truly believes that there are, learning styles. I think there are learning preferences. In terms of our instructional design, we want to consider how to make our work the most accessible. But I definitely think that by having, visuals and having a spoken track, that we're covering all the bases.
And if I can just comment, I would absolutely agree. So I think your slides are visual. It's just that they're less text that actually need to be read. One of the things that I do certainly in teaching is that they all get a handout, and the handout has all the sort of written things that they can read at their leisure, but I'm in front talking to them for a reason. If it's all just about whether they needed to read stuff, they could just read it on their own. So that's what I typically do. I also find it, and I'll just share my workflow, if I'm starting with a new presentation, particularly an information-dense one, like for example when I'm teaching, I do the handout first. I find it very cathartic. I just sort of write out all the information, I get it out of my system, and then I can edit that a little bit, but then I look at that and say, okay, what actually do I need to speak to, and how do I represent that and illustrate it in a slide presentation? So that works for me. I don't know, some other people like to do mind maps, some people, I'm also kind of a post-it note person, but I really do find that early on in the process, if I type out my documents, I can get that kind of out of my system.
That's great. Thank you, Bob. And there's another question posed. Lisa Rivard asks of Bob, where do I find information on the 8 cognitive principles?
Yeah, so that's an easy question. So if you do go to my handout, it's a bit convoluted. So if you can't find it, just email me and I can send you the link. But if you go to my handout, I make that little quote. I think it's like on the 2nd page about design not being intuitive, and it's a hyperlink. So if you sort of tap on that or click on that, depending on where you're viewing it, it will take you actually directly to the article, which is very interesting. And I think someone else asked, if I don't mind, I just saw it flash by about, while I'm on the topic of handout, where do you find free images? So I do actually have a list of some places where you can find good free images there to help you too. They're becoming less and less available. So all the free sites I used to go to are no longer free or don't exist.
Okay, great. And from Rosa, she posed a question here. You also mentioned the templates are not usually the best. Do you have examples of good templates? Because if the logo is a noise, the template and background designs of PowerPoint might be also considered noise.
I'm assuming that's to me. I'll answer that anyway. So Rosa, I think you've, I feel happy I think you got the message. So I start with blank. It's white. And so you have a free open canvas to do what you'd like. So I would discourage that. I discourage a template. I like, as I say, start with a white one. I move the text boxes to where I want them to be. Put the logo on your first slide, put it on the last slide, and you're good to go.
That's great, Bob. And there's another question just below that from John Aspler, and he's asking about reading text aloud with long quotes. Do you only put key parts on the slide?
Sidneyeve, I don't know if you want to answer that. Do you want?
Well, you know what? I'll take a stab at that. I think that this is going to sound very judgmental, but I don't think that we should use long quotes in presentations. Even if we're reading them out loud, I think that oftentimes will put people to sleep. I think if it needs to be distributed through the presentation, that might be an opportunity for us to explore the slide docs options from Duarte designers that we presented. But I love the idea, and I think it was it John's idea? I can't see the chat because it's going so fast, which we're very happy to see. Thank you for your participation. But what I would say that if we really do, want to share that quote, yes, let's pull a tagline from the quote, put it on our slide in a reasonable sized font, and read the rest and make sure people have the reference so that they'll be able to get the full text later. Great idea.
And the other thing I would say to that, like with traditionally text-heavy slides, so one of the questions I often get are in research presentations, they're putting their research question up. And so there's this need, like, how do I do this if I want people to know what the research question is? So one thing I'd say is that you can't necessarily go from 0 to 60 and go from, very text-heavy slides to just having pictures with very little. It's hard to do, and so I always tell people to take a stab at it. When they're text heavy, one simple thing you can do is spread them over a number of slides. So, I'm old enough that we actually had to buy slides, like they were physical slides that you put in a projector, so there was a cost per slide. Nowadays they don't cost anything, so you could take one's, what you might have crammed into one slide and spread it over a number of slides. The other thing to do with long quotes or longish quotes is to actually pick keywords and apply the principle of contrast. So make the font heavier, make the color different, make the font a lot bigger, so that if you did the glance test, you actually then would actually see the keywords that you really want to stand out.
That's great, Bob. Thank you. And I'm not sure which one of you would like to address this, but Christine Tipper has thanked you for everything she's learned and always tries to keep text out of slides, but often has a lot of data to present, and slides tend to get busy and design principles go out the window. If one has a lot of data to get across, would you recommend more slides with less or fewer info-dense slides? Sometimes she feels like whipping through many is very distracting, and it seems to me that slower, richer slides may be more effective. What do you think?
I'll be happy to take a stab at that. Thanks for that comment, Christine. This is Sidneyeve. I really feel your sort of presentation pain there. I definitely do. And I think I'm going to go back to something that I said earlier, which is to say put away the shovel. And this is really, I'm sort of speaking to myself here. So I think that if we have a presentation where we have to say so much that we're walking in with 200 minimalist slides and we are literally, to quote you, whipping through them, I think it would be very distracting, even if they're beautiful. And so instead, why don't we consider, what is the most important information that we need to present live in the sort of event programming format, and then what else can we deliver in an alternative way? Do we need to think about a series of presentations, one of which is presented live, the rest of which are available on SlideShare or through Slide Docs? I think we just need a strategy to manage our information overload there.
If I could just add a comment too. I had an interesting discussion just yesterday of a similar question. A resident asked me, how do I do the table? Like, the table of, she was talking about a research presentation of the initial state, when you have your two groups and are they comparable? And so I asked her a provocative question and I said, so what percentage of the audience do you actually think is interested in the table? And she sheepishly admitted probably nobody or very few. And so I think that that's using that concept of I said that I'm interested as an audience that, in fact, that the initial characteristics were looked at, and maybe you could even tell me what they were, and you could say that verbally, but you don't necessarily have to have a table presented to do that. But I would do a couple of caveats. There's usually one or two people in the audience who'll always want to know what the table is. And so the question is that do you do a slide for that one person? Or what I would suggest is you put that slide in your back deck so that when they ask you in the question period they want to see it, then you can bring that forward. And the other exception I would say is unless that one person is marking you. So in a student thing, if the person who wants all the tables and wants all the data, if they're actually, if you're being marked based on that, then you need to consider that.
Okay, that's great. And there's another question from Jonathan Down that I think both of you could probably, perhaps, comment on if you've had any experience with this. But if you're invited to give a talk on a subject that you are not familiar with, what is the approach that you use?
I can tackle that quickly. This is Sidneyeve. I would go into reporter mode. I think that we do this oftentimes when we are teaching, that we may not be the expert on every subject that we need to cover in our courses, but instead we can demonstrate excellent reporter and researcher skills. And that would be my approach for sure. Oftentimes this will happen to me when a client, not very recently, the library wanted me to come in and speak. Not long before that, the psychology department wanted me to come in and speak. And these weren't my areas of research, so I did a lot of Googling around and creeping of the client, quote unquote, so that I could have references to those particular websites and those particular faculty and staff, and also their competitors in the marketplace, so that I could look at larger trends that might be relevant to them. So I think this just showing off our research and reporter skills might be the answer there for me. Bob?
And I can actually attest that Sidneyeve did that for the School of Medicine too, and she came and presented to us because she was creeping our social media profiles and other things, so it was effective. The only other tip I would get is that, and again I'll go back to the so what, we need a so what to our message. So I usually would really dig into why is this important, why should people want to hear about this, and what's important with that. That generates my own excitement in the material, and then as I'd say, or like Sydney said, you go into sort of investigator and reporter mode to learn more about it.
Okay, those are great suggestions. Thanks to both of you. Marion Williams asks, what is the minimum font to use? And is there a recommended amount of time to spend on each slide? Bob, you're the typography expert?
Yeah, I am the, yes, I am the, I've been labeled as having an unhealthy obsession with typography. So, so from a minimum font size, Marian, I would say that you use your grid and you lay it out to see. So I don't think it can be, it certainly can be too small, but it wouldn't be too big. I'm going to say that just in general, I don't really use rules like that to sort of say it should never be any less than 20 or whatever, because I think you need to apply the glance test and say, can I get that message quickly, and really do I only have one message on that slide? And I've also countered the rule of the amount of time per slide. So a common rule that you hear out there is 1 minute per slide. And that rule was done in an era and assuming that you have teleprompter slides. So that makes sense because you have a lot of material, a lot of points per slide that you're going to need that amount of time to get through that. But it's not unheard of for me to have, for a 30-minute presentation, to have a slide deck of over 80 slides. Most of them are builds or transitions, but still, if you counted slides, people would think that that was crazy. And clearly I'm going through them much faster than a minute per slide. So I think the key is really how much time are you allotted and how much time does it take your message to come through based on what you have on your slides.
Okay, great. And Rosa has asked, what do you think about having an outline or kind of a visual track of where she is in her presentation, how long more remained? Is that also a noise or something good to have?
I think that this is Sidneyeve. I think that what you may be referring to is sort of like having a breadcrumb trail, you know, visual, like we see when we're doing surveys online. Is that sort of what you're thinking about there, Rosa? Certainly that would be helpful if it was a super boring presentation. I would love to know, you know, how much more do I have to sit through of this. But you know, I think there's various ways that we can visually communicate to our audience, you know, where we are in a presentation. If we have a 3-point presentation or some kind of other organizational schema, that might be extremely helpful to help us organize our presentation. I would ask you, as sort of a design challenge, if you do something like that at the end of the day, if you think it may be adding noise, delete it. You know, test it out on a family member or a colleague, you know, somebody who loves you and knows that you need to do a great job, and just ask them, you know, is it performing any function? If it's just decorative, that's a good, you might want to keep it. But if it's not performing any function at all, really, is it something that can be removed because it's just a visual distraction?
Sounds good. Great. Thank you for that, Sidneyeve. And Rosa also asks if you have any tips on how to put yourself in the position of the listener to see if there's too much information. She finds this difficult to do. And it's important to follow the less is more principle. Any tips on how to make yourself the listener and look at your slides?
I'll jump in on that, and it is Sidneyeve. So I think that one principle that's been useful to me is make sure that you're giving the audience what they asked for, or what the event planner or organizer asked you to present. So oftentimes, you know, the presentation title is very misleading, because when we get into the room, somebody has had a brainstorm and they've come up with something else to present for us. So I think that when we think about the importance of titles, programs, and plans, that people are in the room to get what they thought they were going to get in the advertisement, and we need to deliver on that promise rather than flipping the script. So that's one thing, just to do what we said we were going to do, or what we were asked to do. Now, Bob was also talking about using human-centered design principles. So, Bob, do you want to say something here?
Well, I'm not sure about human-centered design, but I would certainly echo what you said previously. Is that, you know, the real test is to actually get somebody who's going to be willing to tell you. And you know, I think to do a high-stakes presentation well, it is about rehearsing and practicing. And I think that if you do have somebody listen, they're going to tell you whether things make sense. I do find, even for myself, if I don't even have that person I can speak to, I certainly, if I do it out loud to myself, I really do get a sense that, you know, I'm going way too much into something. So I would say practice and practice, and then I think you do want to sort of seek out those people to give you feedback. That's in preparation. I found, certainly from education, I'm fortunate to have access to some educational developers. So when I'm trying out something new, I'll often invite them in to come in and watch and give me feedback afterwards.
I'm just going to add one quick point. This is Sidneyeve. Especially when you're invited in as a professional speaker, it's been my experience, and I'm sure it's been other people's experience too in the room, that we go to events and we see the speakers, the keynote speakers and featured speakers come in 1 minute before they present, and they leave 1 minute after. And so I think that you know, scheduling is what it is. But if you can actually be at the event, you know, before and after your presentation, sometimes you will pick up enough information that you'll be able to be a bit agile in your slide preparation, so that you're deleting slides or you're adding slides or making reference to other presenters that have come before you. And I think when you can do that, especially if you're keynoting, it makes an enormous difference, because it seems like you're present and that you're thinking about the people in the audience. This is not just canned content.
Okay, thank you, Sidneyeve, and thank you, Bob. I think that was the last question, other than Melissa Trainer earlier had, I think it was more of a proposal. Would anyone be interested in collaborating to do a presentation? It is an exclamation mark. So I think that's it, and I'll hand it back over to Annalise.
Thank you, Stacy, for facilitating the Q&A period. And thank you to Sidneyeve and Bob for being able to answer all of those questions. I wanted to thank both of you, Dr. Sidneyeve Matrix and Bob Connolly, for your excellent presentations, and thank you to all of our participants for joining us today. Your feedback is used to inform our services and future webinars, so please be sure to click on and fill out the evaluation survey. If you did not get a chance to fill it out during the Q&A period, it'll open automatically when the webinar is finished. It will also be emailed to all participants who registered. We'll send the link to this webinar recording to each of you afterwards in an email. It'll probably take about a week. We look forward to hearing from you. Thank you, and goodbye, everybody.